What's up, AP Psych? Welcome back. So we are continuing our investigation into development, and we're moving on from um, newborns and prenatal stage into infancy and childhood. And this is a big one, so it's 2 pages of your notes. It's kind of like two note sections combined once again. We're going to talk in this one about physical, social, and cognitive development throughout infancy to childhood stage. So this is a great opportunity for you to use your reading guide to help you because it's a lot of terms, concepts, and more theorists. So let's jump in, starting with our physical development. So first, when we talk about physical development, we're talking about your physical maturation, biological growth process, which is uninfluenced by experience, right? It's our sequence of motor development, and the sequence is universal, so that's why we say it's uninfluenced by experience, right? So every individual, every child is going to go through this. Generally goes in the order of, you learn to roll over, crawl, walk, and it generally happens in the time frame here below, but yet the timing can be individualistic, right? It can depend on the individual and how they're developing physically as a single person. So generally, you sit up unsupported about 6 months. Then you start to crawl at 8 to 9 months. You begin to walk around a year, and you can start walking, independently without holding on to things or pulling yourself up or holding your parent's hand at about 15 months. But again, these are the classic averages, and some children, develop more quickly or more slowly than this based on their environment. So now we'll move into cognitive development, right? And the big name to remember here, Jean Piaget. We're going to go over this in class. We'll talk about the stages in there as well. But make sure you star this, underline it, highlight it. It's a big name that we need to know. So he believed that children moved from stage to stage as they matured and were exposed to relevant types of experiences. Okay, so this gets into another big debate in psychology. We talked about nature versus nurture, and childhood development gets into the debate over continuity versus discontinuity. So Jean Piaget believes in discontinuity, that we develop in stages, and we have these stage milestones that we hit, and now we can do and achieve these things from a cognitive standpoint. Where other psychologists say that, development is a continuous process, kind of like growth. As you grow taller, you slowly do that over your early life. They would say that these stages aren't really as rigid as Piaget claims, but this is Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Okay, and he would say our cognition develops and is shaped by errors we make. Right, so as you're young, you kind of go through trial and error, and your brain develops as a result. You can see these children trying to slide down a miniature slide that they're obviously too big for, but they don't realize that yet because they don't have that level of thought. Or trying to sit in this miniature car, which she's never going to fit into, but they haven't gotten to that stage of development yet in Piaget's theory to understand what they're trying to do is not going to work. So all of this comes back to schemas, and we've touched on these before in class, but we're coming back to them again for development. Okay, so just going back over schemas, they're our mental framework into which we organize or pour our experiences. And I know we struggled with that definition a little bit early in the year, but it's how we organize things in our minds. It's a mental framework, right? And it helps us interpret the world around us. So we have an example here. You have 2-year-old Gabriella, and she's learned the schema for cow from her picture books, right? She knows what a cow looks like, the sound it makes, things like that. Well, she sees a moose with her mom, and she calls it a cow. She's trying to assimilate or incorporate this new animal into an existing schema. Well, her mother tells her, no, that's not a cow, that's a moose. It's something new. You haven't learned this before. So she then accommodates her schema for large, shaggy animals and continues to modify that to include the moose, a mom moose, and a baby moose, and so forth. So children go through this process of creating schemas. Then they try to incorporate or assimilate information into already existing schemas, and when it doesn't fit, they accommodate and create new categories within those schemas. So just to break that down a little bit more, you have Jean Piaget here with one of his children subjects that he was working with. But as these children go through new experiences, they shape their schemas in those two ways that we just touched on. They either assimilate information, or they're interpreting new information in terms of existing schema. They're trying to fit new info into something they already know. And a lot of times that's incorrect because they don't have the correct schema for what they're seeing. So once they find out that they can't assimilate it, they accommodate. Accommodation is an adapting their existing schema to incorporate this new information. So, this moose doesn't fit in category of cow. Well, now I need to change my schema for big shaggy animals, and I need to have a category for cows. And I'm now accommodating and creating a category for moose. Right? So they're assimilating, adding new information. If it doesn't fit, then they accommodate and make new categories within their schema. So as children develop, they're doing this constantly, right? And there's different stages that Piaget claims that children go through. And we'll talk about each one specifically. Sensory motor from birth to 2 years old, pre-operational from 2 to about 6 or 7, concrete operational from 7 to 11, and formal operational from 12 through adulthood. And all of these stages are characterized by different important milestones that they're looking for children to hit as they develop and continue on with life. You can take a picture of this if you want. I just thought it was a good way to show the basic overview of each stage, but we're going to hit each one individually. Starting with sensory motor. So we experience the world with our 5 senses in the sensory motor stage. That makes sense, right? Your senses, your movements, you're experiencing the world through those, through your looking, hearing, touching, mouthing, and grasping. So this is that time period when a child gets something and they want to put it directly in their mouth because that's how they experience the world. They also begin to develop something called object permanence in this stage around 9 months. And now they know that objects and people exist even if they're out of sight. So if you've ever interacted with a child, younger than 9 months old, they love peekaboo, right? Because they actually think you disappear when you cover your face because they don't have object permanence yet. If it's out of sight, it's out of mind, it no longer exists. But once they hit 9 months old, they can develop that object permanence, and they know just because they can't see something doesn't mean it no longer is. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? And you can see that here. This child at about 8 months, she's understanding that her stuffed animal here, when it gets covered by this blanket, it's still there, right? She's happy about it, right? She's discovering that, if I can't see things, it doesn't mean they don't exist, right? And that's one of the major milestones of the sensory motor stage, object permanence. So as the stages continue, once you hit these milestones, children will move into the pre-operational stage, which is about 2 to 7 years old, so early elementary school. And children start to develop their language and their symbolic thinking. So they begin to speak, but also they begin to play and think like, this banana is my telephone. There's symbolic thinking, symbolic play. And Piaget concluded that preschool children, one major milestone they have here, they become egocentric. They cannot perceive things from another's point of view. Okay? And one big study they did here was the Piaget's 3 mountains egocentrism test. And they would ask these children in the pre-operational stage to draw the mountains from the clown's point of view or the doll's point of view. And they couldn't do it. They would draw it from their exact same point of view because they think everyone sees the world the same way that they do. And they think everyone knows what they know. And that's why if you're interacting with children, it can be tough to play with them or understand what they're saying because they think you already know what they know and they think you see what they see because they're so egocentric. And it's not the same egocentrism we think of as adults. Egocentric adults only care about themselves and things like that. But children in this egocentric stage, they physically or cognitively can't get past that yet. They haven't gone through that stage. But this is also why playing hide and seek can kind of show the egocentrism and the egocentric nature of this stage. If a child hides and puts their face in a corner in the wall and they can't see you, they're like, they can't see me, right? I'm in a perfect place to hide. They'll never find me because of that egocentric milestone that they're trying to work through. So that's pre-operational stage. In addition to egocentrism in this stage, children also lack the concept of conservation. And this is the knowledge that quantity can remain the same when shape or other properties change. Right, so there's been some funny studies with this. We'll watch some videos in class. But one great example, a 4-year-old doesn't understand that an 8-ounce glass of Kool-Aid in a short, small glass is the same as 8 ounces in a tall, skinny glass. If you poured this into a tall, skinny one and asked that 4-year-old which one had more liquid in it, they would point to the tall, skinny one because it looks like to them it has more liquid, right? That's the idea of conservation. They don't understand conservation yet. And that will be a big milestone to overcome for them to move into the next stage of Piaget's theory. which is our concrete operational stage. So this is 7 to 12, and this is where we develop the ability to think in a more logical manner. So in this stage, children master the idea of conservation. So that's an easy test to see if they've moved into this stage yet or not. And they're no longer egocentric. They can see things from other people's point of view, right? And they can understand, why someone's upset. They can understand sharing and things like that. They don't think of things from their own singular point of view at this time anymore. However, things are still presented pretty simply and in a hands-on manner so that they can work through it and learn what they need to continue development. And they can also transform mathematical functions. So if you help them solve 4 plus 8 equals 12, then give them 12 minus 4, they're going to know that's equals 8, right? They can do that exchange. They can make that transformation rather easily because they're beginning to think in that more logical manner. Our final stage is characterized by abstract reasoning, and that's 12 years old through adulthood. Right? We're starting to think more abstractly. We can build hypothetical ideas. We can think about complex problems and things like that. Because you can start to approach them systematically and rule out all the possibilities along the way. Right? You're becoming to think more like an adult. This is thought to emerge during the teenage years and really develop, throughout high school and into college. But research has shown that not everyone fully masters this stage. And some research has shown that even, approximately only 60% of adults reach this stage. So this could be another criticism of Piaget's theories, right? It's maybe not stage-like. Maybe there is some type of continuity and slow development throughout the lifespan. But 60% of adults are the only ones who've reached this formal operational stage. So there are some adults out there who don't and can't really think abstractly. And I'm sure some of you are experiencing this right now. You're in this stage, right? Hopefully you're going through some classes that are tough and you're trying to think about abstract ideas and hypothetical problems. And you might struggle with it a little bit because you're still working through this formal operational stage of life. So some reflections on Piaget's theory. They've been really influential globally. A lot of books written about it, a lot of development things wrapped around Piaget's thoughts. And how, he talks about growth and development in many cultures and societies. However, there are some criticisms, right? Other people argue that development is a continuous process. It happens like as if you grow taller slowly. It happens slowly. It's not like stages. You don't just grow 3 inches in a night. Like Piaget would say, you move from one stage to the next. Some argue that it's a continuous developmental process. Children also can express their mental abilities and operations at earlier ages. So there are some kids who develop egocentrism earlier or understand conservation earlier. So it shows that, it's an individual process, that these children generally hit these milestones at similar times, but some develop earlier, some develop later. And formal logic is a smaller part of cognition, at least some argue, than what Piaget puts a large emphasis on it in his last 2 stages of development. So that kind of wraps up our cognitive discussion of development in the childhood to adolescence. Now we're going to talk about social development and how that works. So beginning with something called stranger anxiety is a fear of strangers, and this develops around 8 months old. And this is the age at which infants form schemas for familiar faces. They organize and interpret the faces that they've seen and understand them. And when they get a new face, they can't assimilate it, and they panic and they freak out, and that creates stranger anxiety. If you've ever seen a child, meet Santa Claus for the first time, a lot of them, it's not a great experience because they're going through that stranger anxiety and that social development. Now, all of this social development can come back to our relationships to attachment and parenting styles. Okay, so we'll talk about attachment first. An attachment is a positive emotional bond that develops between a child and a particular individual. Now, notice we didn't say parent here. We just said particular individual. You can develop attachment as a young person to many different people, parents, grandparents, role models, teachers, whatever. Whoever can provide this positive emotional bond that can lead to attachment. Okay, so it doesn't just have to be a parent. How we discover this. So Harry Harlow, it's a big seminal study in psychology, but he took infant monkeys away from their biological mothers at birth. Okay, and he gave these baby monkeys 2 options. He gave them a wire mother. He here that provided milk, so sustenance, food, a biological need. They provided a cloth mother here uh, that was warm but didn't have milk. Right? And what he found was the baby monkeys spent most of their time clinging to the cloth mother, right? And went occasionally over here to the wire mother to nurse. Okay? So what did this show? This showed that attachment wasn't about food and biological need. It was about comfort and these social comforting needs. And it kind of just provided this insight to, oh, maybe there is more to attachment than just providing for, a child or an infant. Maybe you actually need to really care for it and give it some social development as well. So some implications we just kind of touched on a little bit, but he transfers this idea to humans, that human attachment grows through the responsiveness of the infant's caregivers to the signals the baby provides. So the more responsive your caregiver is, when a baby cries, smiles, reaches out, tries to communicate in some way, if the caregiver responds, they're going to create a positive emotional attachment and a secure attachment, which leads to better, more secure development. We touched on this the very first nature nurture notes, but the more face time you get, the more positive touch you have, the more attention you receive as a child, your brain develops more strongly and it develops at the proper time. So secure attachment is characterized by relaxed and attentive caregivers becoming the backbone of that. So you need someone who is going to help you through, be attentive to you, but not, emotional in terms of flying off the handle if you do something incorrect. They're relaxed and they're going to give you what you need. On the other hand, Harlow's study showed that monkeys experience great anxiety when their cloth mother was removed. Right? If they're not receiving the attention that they need, if they're not receiving that social, emotional support, and that warmth and that comfort, it can lead to insecure attachment, which has various impacts down the road. So, in addition to Harlow's study on monkeys, Mary Ainsworth did a study that showed us the different attachment styles to our caregivers. So, to test this, she had created the stranger and strange situation. And to test the level of attachment in which the mother and child enter an unfamiliar room, the mother lets the child explore while she sits down. Okay? So the mother takes the child into a room, the child starts exploring, the mother's sitting in the chair. Then they let a strange adult enter, and the mother leaves. And the mother returns a short while later with the stranger leaving. And they do all this to see the reactions of the child and try to learn something about their attachment from this situation. So what they found that securely attached children will use mom as a home base. And they'll start exploring the room. If here's the mother, they'll start by her and they'll start exploring the toys. They'll go around the corner. They'll check the room out. And they'll occasionally return to her just to check in, make sure she's still there, get some comfort from her. And when she leaves, they show distress. And they go to her when she returns. So this shows secure attachment, right? They're distressed when mother leaves. When they come back, they're thankful. They want to be comforted. Okay? Now, insecurely attached children, they reacted in a couple different ways. When the mother left, if they were avoidant insecure attachment, they don't cry, and they avoid her when she returns. They kind of stay away, right? Because they're not experiencing that comfort. They don't have that secure attachment. Ambivalent insecure, they display anxiety when mom is in the room, and they're upset when she leaves. But when she returns, they might go to her, they might not. At the same time, maybe they'll go to her and hit her or kick her or punch her for leaving. It's that ambivalentness. They're just kind of undecided in how they're going to react because they haven't had that secure attachment throughout the early development. They don't expect that from the mother, and it causes anxiety and stress in their reactions. So what those findings continue to show is that children who are securely attached tend to be more socially and emotionally well-adjusted and are seen as more cooperative, capable, and playful children and develop in that way into adulthood. However, even if children have a lack of secure attachment, that doesn't mean they're going to have difficulties necessarily later in life, right? Attachment style is related to the social environment in which the children are raised. So different cultures emphasize different styles of attachment. And remember, attachment isn't just with the mother, right? If the mother has insecure attachment, Maybe the child is attached securely in another way to someone else, and someone else is helping fill that void of comfort, and showing them what they need and helping them develop appropriately. But again, it all depends on your social environment, expectations of culture, and the people in your life. So in addition to attachment, we have parenting styles that also impact social development. And the lead psychologist in the area of parenting styles was Diana Baum-Rind, and she developed 4 different parenting styles. Okay. First one, we're going to talk about the 2 kind of on the outer edges here. The first is authoritarian, and just by the name, I'm sure you can kind of think about this, what this will mean. But these are rigid, punitive, and demand unquestioning obedience from their children. These are the parents who are my way or the highway, do it because I told you so, you're living under my roof, it's my rules kind of parents. They have strict standards and discourage expressions of disagreement. As a result, their children tend to be a bit unsociable, unfriendly, and withdrawn, right? Because they haven't had the chance to understand why things are happening, why they need to do things. They don't talk it out. They just do it because they're told to, and that leads to this type of personality, these type of personality characteristics and traits in adulthood. On the flip side of authoritarian, you have permissive, and these parents are more concerned about their children liking them and being friends with them than they are about being parents to them. They give children relaxed or inconsistent direction, and although they're nice, they require little of their kids, right? They don't want them to be upset with them. So their children tend to be immature, moody, dependent, and have low self-control because they've never been given strict expectations or guidance, so they don't know how to handle life, and they think that everything's going to come easy to them. And so just thinking about this, permissive style parenting can lead to high anxiety in adulthood because you come to these roadblocks or you meet expectations in your job or from people who actually require things of you, and you don't know how to handle it because you've never been taught how to do that. So that's authoritarian on one side, permissive on the other. And as we move into the last 2, we have authoritative and uninvolved. So we'll talk about uninvolved first. Uninvolved, this is where parents show little interest in their children and they're emotionally detached. So if you go back to Harlow's study, one monkey provided food, the other provided comfort. An uninvolved parent sees their job as providing food and shelter. I've provided for you. That's all I need to do as a parent, right? And that's kind of what they see their role as. In the most extreme form, uninvolved parents could be guilty of neglect, which is a form of child abuse because they're not actually really taking care of their children emotionally. And these children tend to feel unloved and emotionally detached, and that can impact their future relationships into adulthood. So those first 3 parenting styles serve different purposes and they have different results than authoritative. Authoritative is a little bit more democratic, and these parents are firm, they set limits, and they set goals for their children, but they explain and they use reasoning to set those limits. They have a discussion with their child about why they're creating those limits or why they're creating those goals, and they can create them together. And often, we said children have some role in making those decisions. And they also encourage a children's independence, encourage them to do things on their own with guidance if they need it, with advice if they need it. And this results in kids who are likable, self-reliant, independent, and cooperative. So generally, authoritative parenting is thought of as the best parenting style because it creates kids who seem to be able to be independent and self-reliant and work through problems when they encounter them, as opposed to the 3 other styles of parenting. So again, which is the best parenting style? We talked about authoritative, but in the end, parents have to decide how they want to raise their children, and it's their decision. And temperament or disposition of the child can also have a lot to do with the parenting style used. If you have a kid who's disobedient for some reason, you might have to be a little bit more authoritative in some situations, or maybe there's other issues that you don't really tend to care too much about, so maybe you're more permissive. So it might be a blend of these parenting styles, or in the culture you grow up in, maybe it leads to a different parenting style, and that works just fine. So again, it really depends on the situation. But if you were just to look at them on the face, authoritative would be your most beneficial, but certain situations may call for others as well. So that wraps up our infancy to childhood development. We talked briefly about physical and then social and cognitive developments during this stage of life. Next up, we'll get into adolescence and then wrap up with adulthood. So we'll do some activities in class with these, especially Piaget's stages and the parenting styles as well. Let me know if you have any questions.